And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3. It is Tuesday, June 11th, 2024, coming to you from Long Beach, California. We got a mailbag episode with my guy, Travis Rooke-Ley. We like to make this a weekly thing, and big commitment for the Ducks yesterday. So here we are on a Tuesday. But before we get into today's episode, the Ducks Dish podcast is brought to you in part by Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your dinner plans are tonight, but head on over to Springfield. Head on over to Ranchito in Springfield at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Travis, how the heck are you, man? Feels like it's been a minute. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Max. Thanks for having me on. Last week of school, weather's getting nice. A lot of awesome engagement, listener questions out there. So excited to get rolling.
Right on, right on. It's almost summer. That's definitely a big thing on my end as well. My girlfriend's a teacher, and a lot of our best friends are in education, so they're just antsy for the summer months that are basically just about here. So lights at the end of the tunnel, but it's been a fun week so far, and it's been an eventful one over for us at ScoopDuck with 2025 Florida offensive tackle Zaire Addison committing. We got boatloads of coverage over on that, as well as a couple new recruiting predictions from yours truly for our Prediction Tuesday. So try us out at ScoopDuck.com for just $1. With all that being said, Travis, let's get into some questions. What do you got for us?
Let's do it. First things first, we kind of discussed a little bit off air, but we got a great question about just like building a dream coaching staff for the Ducks. And so we're going to plan to hit that kind of as its own standalone episode of some sort. So apologize that we're not going to get that today, but it's coming. We love the question so much. We're going to turn it into its own episode. With that being said, I think the first question we got here, what do you think is the ceiling and floor for the 2024 Ducks team?
That's a good one. That's a good one for sure. I think the floor is probably, I have to think like 9 wins for Oregon, or if not 10. I guess I just think of that as best worst case scenario. But this Oregon team is loaded, Travis, and you don't need the listeners and the viewers, if you're watching us here on the ScoopDuck YouTube channel, you don't need us to tell you that Oregon's loaded. So I feel like maybe 10 wins might be an even more appropriate floor. But gosh, yeah, the ceiling has to be a national championship, right? We've talked a lot about it as far as the expanded playoff being good and bad. I think it makes the path to a national championship harder because of just the sheer amount of games that you're playing. I was listening to Josh Pate earlier today, and he had a great point. It's like if you go to a conference championship game and you lose, then you're still going to the playoff more than likely, I guess, if you're looking at the Big Ten situation, right? But then you don't get a break, and you got to go right into that first playoff game. So I feel like that's probably the ceiling and the floor for Oregon. I mean, I go 9-10 wins for the floor and a national championship for the ceiling. I think that all the hype is obviously at an all-time high, but I don't think that it's without good reason. I think it's justified with what we've seen this team do on the field, these coaches, and then, of course, the way that they're recruiting and acquiring top talent.
Yep. Yeah, and on that point, I think a lot of us have been saying from the start, I hope that they really are mindful about those losers in the conference championship games, specifically the Big Ten and SEC. I mean, I don't see a world in which you should be hurt by playing in your conference championship game and losing. So I know a lot of people have been talking out there about locking in seeding, different solutions to that. But to your point right there, that you shouldn't be incentivized for not making it to Indianapolis in the Ducks case. So I just hope they can find a way to kind of block out those 5 and 6 seeds for that specific scenario. To your question, I mean, I think that what makes this team different is that the depth in place doesn't it removes the like scenario in which the season implodes. We've seen other years a quarterback go down specifically, and this Duck team to look completely different. The difference this year being you got Dante Moore. Something happens to Dylan Gabriel. Oh, let's pull a 5-star top 5 recruit in the country who already has starting experience, albeit struggled a little bit at UCLA, but I'd argue that was a lot of system rather than Dante himself. So I just don't see the downside scenario being anything less than probably 9 wins, as you say. I mean, everything breaks wrong. Maybe you lose 3 conference games. But that to me is the absolute floor. And as you said, ceiling, I mean, how can it be anything other than a title? Obviously, the path is a little bit different, but the roster's never been in a better place.
And the backup quarterback situation, I think, really might be the biggest key to this puzzle, Travis, right? Because like you said, the backup quarterback has kind of always been that question, not in terms of who's it going to be, but it's just, is that person going to be ready? And I mean, I don't want to go too far down too into the weeds here, but Ty Thompson, if you're just looking at Oregon, I'm not, by no means am I saying Ty Thompson was the weak link. I loved Ty Thompson. I just didn't really think that it was going to pan out for him at Oregon, and it didn't, based on the conversations that I'd had with people, based on what we saw on the field when he was able to ultimately get into the game. He wasn't ready. And the result of that was Oregon didn't really have a capable backup quarterback. But it feels like, especially with the addition of Dante Moore, but we can't leave out Austin Novosad, who, aside from that pick in the spring game, looked dialed in. So with all of that, it does feel like the Ducks have been recruiting the trenches the way they've been needing to for years now. Receiver recruiting has elevated. Running back recruiting, never been a problem. Now it kind of feels like DB is maybe a little bit of that last hump that they're trying to get over, if we're just talking about big picture. And I think there's reason to believe that they can get over it, or they're starting to get over it. But we'll see if they can close with some of these big names that are expected on campus throughout the month.
Yeah. And just to kind of tie a bow on that a little bit, I think that, if we just look at Vegas over under win totals like that, there's no one more plugged in than Vegas. And I think when you see teams hit an under, when we're just talking about best and worst cases, I'd have to argue, I don't know what, 90% of the time it comes down to a quarterback injury. That's got to be the driving force behind that scenario happening most often. So I just think the Ducks are in a great spot when it comes to that. And I think, if we have to run out Dante for a game or two this year, because I think that the one thing that Gabriel has struggled with in the past is injury, like, I'm fine running out Dante Moore against Illinois at home. I'm going to be totally confident in that outcome, where you think back to, 2017, 2015, that was a totally different team minus our starting quarterback. So I think we're in super good hands when it comes to that. Speaking of quarterbacks, I know you did an interview recently with 2026 QB Ryder Lyons, and we got a question here. What are your thoughts on Ryder Lyons as a prospect and the likelihood that he commits to the Ducks?
Man, Ryder Lyons is one of my favorite recruits in the class of 2026, and one of my favorite recruits on the West Coast. Gotten to see him a number of times in person. He's coming off of a state championship with Folsom in 2023 over, I believe it was St. Bonaventure. They play, of course, on that fabled blue field out there in Northern California. And Ryder is a guy that can just do everything. Before I talk about him as a player, honestly, just one of my favorite guys to talk to. Just love the way he carries himself. Just an awesome young man. And you can definitely tell he has a great head on his shoulders. And with Ryder, it does kind of feel like, in my opinion, for all the big schools that have come after him, for all the offers that he has, he's got basically every offer in the book ahead of his junior season, which, if you follow recruiting, junior season is probably the most important season, because by the time senior season comes around, you already have all your offers for the most part. But that's why I'm a big fan of playing all 4 years and, not reclassifying or, anything like that necessarily, because some of those guys need that senior year, Travis, is what I'm saying. But with Ryder, I do think that USC, Oregon, those seem to be like two schools that are really at the top of his recruitment right now, and have created a little bit of separation from the rest. I think we've seen some predictions. Maybe it's just one that's come in favor of USC landing Ryder Lyons, which is of course the same school that his older brother Walker Lyons, who was a tight end out of Folsom a couple cycles ago. That's where he ended up. So that brother connection obviously helps a lot, as Oregon fans know very, very well. But man, I mean, he spoke so glowingly about his visit to Oregon this spring. He was out there in mid-May. So my story on ScoopDuck is from May 20th. But the quote that I used to lead off with it was that he said, there's not a lot Oregon doesn't have. I mean, his relationship with Will Stein is huge. And I mean, he is pretty much, I think, one of, if not the top targets for Oregon at quarterback, along with a guy like Jaden O'Neal from Harbor City, California, out here in SoCal and Narbonne. But the interesting thing to watch with Ryder, I think he's supposed to be announcing some top schools relatively soon. But it does seem like there's been some chatter, or at least rumor, that he's going to be taking a mission trip as his brother did. But I haven't been able to confirm that myself. I'm just putting that out there for people to know as I try to fill in the blanks here, fill in the cracks.
Yeah, awesome stuff, Max. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm not super plugged in on the 2026 kids quite yet. But I know between him and, as you mentioned, I know one of my college teammates is a Newberry Park High School grad, and I know they have a kid that we're in
Smigel.
on.
Brady Smigel.
So it seems like the options are going to be there. And I mean, if we keep producing quarterbacks at the level we are and recruiting at the level we are, it seems like there's going to be no shortage of options in a state that's been, obviously super good to us over the last few years.
You really can't go wrong if you're looking for quarterbacks going to California, Travis. And Brady's a guy that I've seen a couple times in person, haven't gotten to see him in a game setting yet. A lot of it's been camps. I'm hoping to go out to the Elite 11 next week. The finals are out here in SoCal, so going to see Achilles Smith Jr. and then Ty Hawkins, the TCU quarterback commit, which looks like a guy that Oregon's turned the heat up on recently. He's supposed to be visiting SMU this week. So I'm always trying to get my eyes on as many quarterbacks and as many talented guys as I can. And I mean, if you're looking at the tape here that we're rolling on the channel, I mean, Ryder is just super creative in the pocket, and I'd say he's probably my favorite quarterback in 26, but I really like Jaden O'Neal as well. I think the arrow is pointing way up for him. Feels like Oklahoma and Florida State are kind of near the top in that recruitment, but he's supposed to be out to Oregon for Saturday Night Live in July.
Good stuff. Hey, let's one more quarterback question while we're on it. Over on ScoopDuck. I recently rewatched last season's Red River rivalry, and it was amazing how composed Dylan Gabriel remained in the most intense moments of that game. Considering we'll be playing teams like Ohio State and Michigan, hopefully making a long playoff run, how much did his ability to handle pressure factor into Oregon targeting him in the portal?
I haven't heard that specifically, but at the same time, just listening to you ask that question, it kind of almost feels like it answers itself. Like, you want a guy who's experienced, and you want a guy who you can turn to with some confidence when the game is on the line. And I think that's kind of been a little bit of one of the talking points that I've had surrounding Gabriel throughout much of the offseason. I know that there's been a lot of speculation, or maybe not speculation, but conversation around some of his turnover issues while he was at Oklahoma. Obviously, that's something that's going to be right under the spotlight, Travis, when you're a quarterback for a high caliber program, high profile program like Oklahoma. But I think that one of the reasons I'm excited about Dylan Gabriel, maybe not the reason, but one of the biggest reasons I'm excited about Gabriel being under center, behind center for the Ducks in 2024, he's a gamer. Like, he's just got that kind of it factor to him. Really competitive. Like we've said a million times, he's played a bunch of football, so he's been in that spotlight. He's been in those pressure situations. So I have no doubt that was a huge reason why they went for him in the transfer portal. And I feel like he was pretty much their top guy, along with Dante Moore, obviously. So the fact that Dylan Gabriel gives you confidence that I think you can at least be in any game, or maybe even more importantly, come back if you're in a deficit, I think that's been a huge area of growth that we've seen from Oregon in the past couple of years. I feel like I really I put that Washington State game on the Palouse in 2022, I think it was, when Mace Funa had that game sealing pick six. Like before that, Travis, like we hadn't really seen a lot of comebacks from Oregon. Now, should Oregon have needed a comeback against Washington State? Probably not. I mean, I think a lot of Duck fans would have been more comfortable if they were able to put that one away. But as we've seen, if you have a top quarterback like Cam Ward, you're going to be giving teams a lot of fits. So I think that now, especially after the Pac-12 title game last year, they came out so flat. I thought they were going to get the brakes beaten off of them, but they had a guy like Bo Nix who was really experienced and calm under pressure, and they were able to give Washington everything they could handle until the very end. So there's no doubt in my mind that Dillon Gabriel's ability to handle pressure factored into Oregon targeting them.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of Ward, like it's not like the Ducks didn't have options out there. I mean, I know that there was some Riley Leonard conversation. I know that there was a lot of Cam Ward conversation, but I think for the staff, Gabriel was always that guy, from what I know, and I know that kind of popped up out of the blue suddenly when the portal opened. I think a lot of Duck fans probably had assumed that Cam Ward was going to be that guy early on, but I think that Gabriel, when you blend what you mentioned about like that calm demeanor, played in some big games, I think when you combine that with the fit in Stein's offense, that's kind of what put it as a slam dunk in terms of, the 1A guy to pursue. I think that quick release, accuracy, more like runability than one would think by looking at him. I think that in terms of what Stein wants to do in distributing the ball to playmakers in space and giving them the chance to make the plays themselves, that's what made Nick so successful, was his ability to control the line of scrimmage, get us into the right stuff, and just get the ball in guys' hands to do damage. That was his best asset. I mean, you even hear Sean Payton talking about how that he loves like that aspect of Bo Nix's game. So I think that the crossover with Gabriel in terms of what he can do to get your Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, Jordan James, all these guys involved, I think that's the huge selling point that really like sold this staff on him.
Yeah, it seems like it's a perfect recipe for Dillon Gabriel, for Will Stein and this offense. And you put Gabriel behind a really strong and stout offensive line and surround him with a bunch of weapons. And now we're just waiting to see what he can do. So the anticipation continues to build for the Ducks to have another top quarterback nationally.
For sure. And I mean, you see him, he's right there, top 2-3 Heisman odds to start the season. So I think he's going to be in that conversation all year. Moving over to a couple recruiting questions that you may have a little insight into, just talking to recruits and prospects a lot. With all the turnover that happens both outside this staff and at other schools, and the staffing turnover within the program each year, how much retooling of the pitch for high school players happens year over year?
I think this is a good question, but honestly, I don't think it's all that complicated. I think it probably varies from school to school, Travis, right? Especially like we said with the question, when there's turnover with the staffs. And I mean, this last coaching carousel was insane, but what made it great for Oregon, they were more or less, they escaped unhinged. And that's like a huge thing I've been talking about with a lot of my recruiting coverage, about how I think Dan Lanning's long-term commitment to Oregon could be the difference. So all that said, I mean, I've been hearing a lot of the same stuff from recruits as far as their pitch from Oregon for a long time. And a lot of those things are the development. That's becoming one that's increasingly important. Not only that recruits have always wanted that, obviously, but Oregon's actually being able to show more of their work. Like that's why I've had this, feeling for the longest time that the NFL draft output or the NFL output for Oregon is their best recruiting tool, because they haven't won a national championship. I think that and winning on the field are two of the strongest things that they have at their disposal. But the pitch really more or less stays the same. I mean, Nike's always been there. It's just it's getting much stronger now with the NIL era of college football. Playing for Dan Lanning is huge, which I think kind of lends itself to the point of you never want to lose people on your staff, but as long as Dan Lanning stays around, that's the secret sauce. That's the thing that makes everything hum. And then you have the Autzen atmosphere, like that's a big part that stayed constant. So, I mean, the point that I'm getting at, Travis, is that it really hasn't changed all that much. If anything, I think there's just new elements that can kind of take it to another level. You always hear about that genuine nature. The relationships are huge. So I think the interesting part that I'm more curious to kind of hammer down with some of these recruits and start asking them a bit more, because there is so much overlap. Like I had that Texas overlap podcast with Justin Wells from our Texas site. Like that was super fun. You guys should listen to that or watch it if you haven't. Like when Oregon's going against these blue blood programs, how does it factor into a recruit's mind? Like, okay, I can go somewhere where it's already been done, like in Alabama where they've won tons of titles, or Georgia or something like that, in Ohio State, but I could do that, or I can go to Oregon to win, help them win their first one. Like, I think that's a question that I want to start asking recruits and just, get into their heads a little bit about how does that carry weight, or how does that factor into your recruitment? Because a lot of people perpetually use it to knock Oregon because they haven't won one yet. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like that might be a little bit of an overlooked aspect of recruiting. And I think that really just speaks to the Ducks highlighting and targeting their guys, like who want to be a part of something special at Oregon and ultimately win their first title.
Yeah, and I think that last piece, like, probably often comes down to the goals of the player. I think that you'll probably hear guys who say, I want to win a national title, but I'm guessing you'll hear more guys be like, I want to get developed and go to the NFL. So it's like that classic, yeah, it may be Bama's fourth title in 7 years, but they're also turning out the most NFL guys at the same time. No coincidence. So, yeah, I'd certainly be interested in that. I completely agree with that point about, I think Oregon's always kind of sold itself in a way, and the aspects of Oregon that make it unique and special have been there a while now. They've just kind of shifted in what they look like. It was facilities for a while there, flashy uniforms, things like that. In essence, kind of like resource allocation, and now that resource allocation has shifted a little bit in this new playing NIL and crazy world that college sports has turned into. So I think that piece is always going to be there. What I love and what I think's contributed to Lanning going really national in our like recruiting and ability to pull guys has been like that family culture that you hear a lot of kids talk about. And most importantly, not only kids, but I think you hear and see more coaches, support staff refer to it, which I don't think there's a coincidence between that and the fact that we're retaining our assistants, our support staff, all the people within the HDC that help that place run. Things were turning over pretty quickly under Cristobal, under Taggart, and you just haven't seen that the last few years. So I think the best thing Lanning's done is he preaches like family culture, one big team, but he backs it up with like his staff and with the adults around the building. And once that buy-in is like full and everyone's selling that same message, I think that's led to Oregon not only just creating like a better culture and environment within the team, but I think you're seeing families more likely to send their kid from Texas, send their kid from, we're starting to get to the DMV in Maryland, send their kid from Florida out there, because like that family feel is like genuine. And a mom's comfortable sending her kid 3,000 miles away because of what that staff's built.
Yeah, to your point, the culture part of it is huge, and I'm hearing more about the camaraderie, the brotherhood that the Ducks are building. Like that's a big talking point with another one of Oregon's top targets, Demetri Manning, a big offensive lineman out of the Seattle area that recently took his official visit. He wanted to see how close that offensive line unit was on his trip, and he definitely came away with that box checked. Travis, I know you got to get out of here in a sec, but do you maybe want to hit one more question? I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, all good. We got time for one more for sure. Another recruiter relating question. What percentage of verbal commits end up signing letters of intent? How much does that percentage vary when the verbal is 6 months before signing day? Obviously, pretty specific question, but maybe we can just kind of focus it on what we've seen from the Ducks the last few years, or guys you've chatted with or worked with.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because I really haven't thought about it a whole lot before I got the question, but I'd probably say like somewhere between like 75 and 85 maybe if we're strictly looking at it from an Oregon lens, because sure, you'll lose guys every now and then. You're looking at Sandman Thompson, the lineman in the 25 class out of Florida, as the most recent example, I think. And then Adrian Wilson as well, the wide receiver out of Texas. He committed and decommitted. But it really does feel like, Oregon has a really solid hit rate as far as just being able to hold on to these guys compared to maybe some other schools. And I wonder how much of that factors into their policy on visits. They're not a school where it's like, hey, if you commit to us, you're not allowed to take other visits. It's like, okay, you can do your thing. I'm sure they don't want them to take visits, but I think that that's like an even small part of how the culture trickles down, or you see it early, right? Like, it's like, if you want to be here at Oregon, then you'll stay committed, stay on board. But if we don't want you here, if you don't want to be here, like, I feel like that's the easiest way to put it. And I'm not saying that Oregon is saying that, but I feel like that's just a very standard, obvious frame of thinking. So they've kind of let things be open. A lot of good communication, obviously, from the top down, with landing a lot of these recruits. So I think they've done a really good job of taking the right guys and taking guys that are going to stay committed in the long run. You let them go take their visits, but I think they probably, after they take those visits, they get them back to campus. Like, okay, now let us get our shot. And then a lot of the times they end up comparing everything to Oregon, and then Oregon ends up winning out in the end.
Yeah, and I think you've seen the ways in which different staffs like prioritize and how they handle discussions around NIL, discussions about when to commit early commitments. I mean, Oregon is definitely not the staff that is like push guys to early commit, versus some schools certainly are. Wink, wink, USC. So I think that, I mean, I don't have the data in front of me. I feel like SC's class on a year-to-year basis is so fluid. People are dropping and coming and dropping and coming. And you just see at Oregon, you just don't see that same level of early commit, but you also don't see that level of decommitments. And I think that that's a strategic choice when it comes to the staff, which I think is also true about our conversations around NIL and like resources when it comes to the staff. I think that you saw last year, closer to signing day, I think Lanning and that entire operation has been very strategic about when they're going to have those conversations and when those, final offers per se are going to come in. And I think that's led to us being in the game late with a lot of guys versus that happening early on and then risking, you put all your cards on the table. I'm going to lose that guy late. So I think, personally for me, I'm obviously biased, but I think that's the right way to approach it and the right option. But you also see, I log into ScoopDuck every day and half the board is upset that we don't have, 20 commits by the end of March. So heck, I don't know what's more important.
Yeah. I mean, I like your point about not pushing for early commitments, because I think that's another way you set yourself up to hold on to a commitment when a guy says, hey, I think I'm ready to make it official. That you gave them that space, that you gave them that freedom to just explore the process and see all of their options. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand. I don't know why I never really thought about it that way until you said it just now, Travis. I think that goes hand in hand with Oregon maybe getting some of their highest profile guys late, because they're slow playing guys. They're staying in the mix with guys even when they're committed to other schools. And that ultimately pays off. Like, you don't want to get 3, 4, 5 stars early in the spring if you don't have any confidence that you're going to be able to hang on to them. I don't think that benefits anybody at Oregon. So obviously it'll be good optics for a while, but there's a ridiculous amount of strategy that goes into it, and I think it's just getting more and more evolved with each passing day. What do we
Well,
think?
yeah, I mean, you think about, I just to kind of tie a bow on that a little bit. You think about Dante Moore last year. I mean, didn't quite work out. Who knows what happened late in that recruitment? I've heard some different stories, but heck, I mean, you handle it the right way, and then a year later, he's on your roster. So I think in this world of roster movement, portal, I think just the strategy around that, the way you handle a decommitment if it does come, the way you handle conversations around visits, I think that's all strategic because, whether it's a Dante Moore, a Peyton Woodyard, you never know when, somebody's going to be ready to leave their current situation. And if you're the staff that handled things the right way, handled the decommitment with class and stayed involved in whatever way you can, you never know when that might come back to benefit you. So I'm just super impressed with the way the staff has just kind of navigated this changing world.
It has never been better to finish in second place than right now in 2024. But before we get out of here, Travis, just wanted to let all the people know what we got going over on ScoopDuck. We got tons of great stories. They're the 2 predictions that I put in today. If you want to read that story, an update on one of Oregon's top defensive targets in the 2025 recruiting class. And then later on today, I'll get a commitment decision breakdown from Zaire Addison. So we've got loads and loads of recruiting content, and it's just going to keep coming as the Ducks build towards that June 21st big weekend. But if you want to find more of Travis, you can follow him on Twitter/X at Travis Rooke-Ley. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Torres Sports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck YouTube channel and check us out at ScoopDuck.com for just $1. Share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. But until next time, thank you to Travis for coming on, and thank you to you guys for taking some time to talk some Duck football. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.